Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. I never thought that a single moment inside my own home would change the way I saw everything around me. It started out like any other quiet evening, just the sound of the television in the background, the faint clinking of dishes being put away, and the stillness that often lingers after a long day. But sometimes, life surprises us in ways we don't expect. Sometimes it's not the loud, dramatic events that shake us, it's the silent ones. And that's exactly what happened the night I caught my stepson looking at me in the mirror. It wasn't just a quick glance either. It was the kind of look that makes you stop in your tracks, the kind that leaves you questioning what you just saw and what it really meant. For a moment, I felt frozen. I wasn't sure if it was innocent curiosity or if there was something deeper lingering in that reflection. And in that split second, my heart raced, my mind spun, and I realized that something had shifted between us. Now, before I go further, let me paint the picture. We're not strangers living under the same roof, we're family. Or at least, that's what I always told myself. He's in his early 20s, independent in so many ways, yet still finding his place in the world. I've always seen myself as the steady one, the one who's supposed to set the boundaries, to guide, to protect. But sometimes, emotions don't follow rules. Sometimes, the heart drifts where it shouldn't, and you're left wondering how you even ended up standing at the edge of temptation. As I stood there, pretending not to notice his eyes locked onto me through the mirror's reflection, I felt something I wasn't prepared to feel. There was a tension in the room, unspoken but undeniable. Do you ever get that sensation where time slows down, and you're hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every thought racing through your head? That's exactly where I was. My instincts told me to turn away, to break the moment before it turned into something else. But instead, I lingered. And maybe that was my first mistake. I know some of you might be thinking right now, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you ignore it? Confront it? Or would you secretly wonder what might happen if you didn't walk away? That's the thing about these moments in life. There are no easy answers. That's why I want you to be part of this story with me. Drop a comment and tell me, honestly, how you'd react if you ever found yourself in a situation where the lines between what's right and what feels right started to blur. Because here's the truth, what happened next is something I never imagined I'd do. It was a choice that came from impulse, from emotion, maybe even from loneliness. And the moment I acted on it, I knew there was no going back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This is just the beginning of a story that will take us into places both tender and complicated. A story about desire, about choices, and about how quickly one look in the mirror can change everything. So stay with me. The night I caught my stepson looking at me in that mirror was only the start. That night after I caught him in the mirror, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, over and over, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe I was imagining it, maybe I was just tired. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just in my head. There was something in the way his eyes lingered, something more than an accident. And the strange part was, instead of brushing it off, I found myself thinking about it, wondering what it said about both of us. The truth is, our relationship had always been a little complicated. When I first met his father, he was already a young man. Not a child, not someone I raised from the beginning, but someone already finding his way in the world. At first, we were polite with each other, careful in how we interacted, keeping that respectful distance that blended family members often have. Over time, though, we got comfortable. We'd talk late at night when his dad worked late shifts, we'd laugh over silly TV shows. We'd even cook dinner together when the house felt too quiet. Slowly, those walls that usually separate step from family started to blur. I never thought much of it before. In fact, I told myself it was a good thing, that building trust and closeness only meant we were becoming a stronger family. But sometimes closeness can become confusing, especially when you don't realize how much attention you're giving someone until it's too late. Looking back now, I wonder if the signs were always there. The long stares across the living room, the way he'd sit just a little too close on the couch, the way his compliments always felt a little heavier than they should. The mirror moment was just the first time I couldn't ignore it anymore. And if I'm honest, it was the first time I caught myself not wanting to ignore it. That scared me. It made me question myself, question the kind of person I thought I was. I had always prided myself on being strong, responsible, loyal. But when the heart gets involved, those labels start to slip away like sand through your fingers. The next morning at breakfast, I couldn't look at him the same way. I tried to keep everything normal, poured my coffee, asked him about his plans for the day, kept my tone casual. But every time he spoke, every time he smiled, I remembered the way his eyes had followed me in that mirror. And when our eyes accidentally met across the table, it was like there was a secret between us that neither of us dared to say out loud. There's something dangerous about silence. Words can be denied, brushed off, forgotten. But silence has a way of saying more than you ever intend. And in that silence between us, something was growing, something fragile, forbidden, but impossible to ignore. I told myself I had to put a stop to it, to draw a line before things went too far. But the more I tried to keep distance, the more the tension seemed to build. It was in the small things, the way he'd hold a glance just a second longer, the way I'd catch myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking. It was as though the air in the house had changed, thick with unspoken feelings neither of us wanted to name. And maybe that's why, when his father wasn't around, the quiet evenings started to feel different. The TV would be on, but neither of us would really be paying attention. We'd talk about life, about dreams, about things that felt too personal, too vulnerable. Conversations that didn't belong between us, yet we had them anyway. And with each word, with each laugh, with each accidental touch, the line blurred a little more. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, that pull toward someone you're not supposed to want, that mix of fear and excitement that leaves your heart pounding in your chest. That's where I was. Stuck between what I knew was right and what I couldn't help but feel. And as much as I tried to fight it, the truth is, a part of me didn't want to fight anymore. What happened after those first few nights of silence and tension? That's where the story truly begins to unfold. Because the moment you let yourself lean into temptation, even just a little, everything changes. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope. Every interaction between us seemed sharper, more charged, like even the simplest conversations carried a weight neither of us wanted to admit. I'd find myself second-guessing everything. Was his smile just a smile, or was there more behind it? Was I imagining the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, or was it really there? These questions haunted me, leaving me caught in a storm of doubt and curiosity. At the same time, I kept reminding myself of the reality. He was my stepson. I was supposed to keep boundaries clear, to be the steady presence in his life. But what happens when the heart begins to ignore the rules the mind sets? That's the conflict I lived with every day, the push and pull between responsibility and desire. There was one evening when the house was quieter than usual. His father had gone out for work again, and it was just the two of us sitting at the table. We started talking about simple things, his plans, my day, nothing special. But then, out of nowhere, he asked me about my dreams. Not the small talk kind of dreams, but the deep ones, the things I never told anyone. For a moment, I hesitated, but his eyes were so steady, so genuinely curious, that I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't in years. And when I finished, he just looked at me and said, "You deserve more than you think." Those words lingered, carving themselves into my heart. That's when I realized this wasn't just about attraction. It was about connection. The kind that sneaks up on you and makes you question everything you thought was secure. And maybe that's what made it so dangerous. Because once emotions get involved, it's harder to walk away. But there was another layer to the story too, a subplot quietly weaving itself into the background. His father, though a good man in many ways, had been distant lately. Work consumed him, stress followed him, and little by little, the warmth between us had faded. It wasn't something I liked to admit, but the truth was I felt lonely, even in my own marriage. And loneliness, paired with attention from someone who actually listened, can create a storm you don't see coming until you're already caught in it. Still, guilt weighed on me. I'd catch myself smiling at something his son said and immediately feel that twist in my stomach, as if I was betraying someone without ever crossing a line. And yet, the more I tried to suppress those feelings, the stronger they seemed to grow. It was like trying to hold back water with my bare hands. It kept slipping through no matter how tight I gripped. One night, I caught him looking again, not through a mirror this time, but directly, with no way to pretend it was anything else. The moment was brief, just a few seconds, but it said everything. Neither of us spoke about it, but the silence after was deafening. It was as if we both knew a door had been unlocked, even if neither of us had stepped through it yet. That's where the heart of this story lies, in that unspoken space between what we feel and what we know we shouldn't. Every day became a test of willpower, every glance a reminder of the choice waiting ahead. I don't know if you've ever felt torn like that, caught between loyalty and longing, but it's a conflict that eats at you quietly, piece by piece. And so the tension grew, not with grand gestures or loud arguments, but with the quiet buildup of moments that seemed harmless on the surface. A shared laugh, a brush of hands when passing a plate, a conversation that dug too deep. None of it was enough to be called wrong on its own, but together, it painted a picture that neither of us could deny. The air in the house had grown heavier, almost charged, like every room carried a secret waiting to spill. By then, I could no longer convince myself that what was happening between us was only in my imagination. The glances were too long, the silences too thick, the conversations too layered with meaning. Each day I woke up telling myself I would keep things normal, draw back, and put an end to the tension. And each night, I found myself falling deeper into it. One evening stands out more than the rest. It was late, the kind of quiet where even the ticking of the clock felt loud. His father was gone again, buried in another long shift. I was in the living room, half distracted by a book, when he walked in. There was nothing unusual about it. He just sat across from me, casual, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. But the way his eyes lingered, the way his body leaned forward just slightly, made my pulse quicken. We started with small talk, but the words didn't matter. What mattered was the undercurrent, the unsaid truths humming between us. Every time our eyes met, I felt that pull stronger, like a rope tightening between two people who shouldn't be tied together. At one point, he asked me if I was happy. The question was so simple, yet it cut straight to the heart of what I had been avoiding. I hesitated, laughed it off, tried to change the subject. But his gaze didn't move. He wanted an answer, and the silence that followed was louder than anything I could have said. It was in that moment I realized just how close we were to crossing a line we couldn't uncross. And yet, I didn't move away. Neither did he. It was like we were both waiting, holding our breath, standing on the edge of a choice that would change everything. My heart raced, torn between fear and longing, between responsibility and desire. The room felt smaller, the space between us shrinking with every second. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the book, pretending to focus on anything but him. But I could feel his eyes on me, steady and unrelenting. The weight of that silence pressed down, building into something neither of us could contain much longer. This was the moment, the point where everything balanced on a knife's edge. I knew that whatever happened next would define the rest of our story, whether we admitted it or not. The tension was unbearable, almost electric, and part of me wondered if it was fate that had brought us here or simply choices stacked one after the other until we arrived at this place. The silence between us that night was already too much to handle, but just when I thought I had a sense of where things were going, life threw in something I wasn't prepared for. Out of nowhere, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, and for a brief second, I caught the name flashing across it. It was his father. My husband. The timing couldn't have been worse. One simple ring shattered the air, pulling us back to reality, reminding us of the lines we weren't supposed to cross. He silenced the call quickly, almost too quickly, and when his eyes met mine again, the tension didn't fade, it only grew heavier. That's when I realized this wasn't just a secret between us anymore. The stakes had doubled. We weren't only battling our own emotions, we were balancing them against the life we already had, the trust of someone who didn't even know he was part of this story. And in that realization, a different kind of fear crept in. It wasn't only about what might happen between us, it was about what could happen if anyone found out. But the twist didn't stop there. A few days later, I noticed something unusual. His father had started acting different, asking more questions, watching us a little too closely, almost as if he could sense the unspoken tension in the air. It was subtle, but I felt it in the way his eyes lingered when the three of us were together, in the way his tone changed when he asked about my day. My heart began to race, not only when I was alone with his son, but even when we were all in the same room. This second layer of conflict made everything more dangerous. It was no longer just about what we felt in private, it was about how well we could hide it in plain sight. The suspense grew sharper with every family dinner, every casual conversation that felt like walking through fire. One wrong word, one wrong look, and everything could unravel. And yet, despite the fear, the connection between me and his son only seemed to deepen. Maybe it was the pressure of keeping it inside, maybe it was the thrill of secrecy, but the more we tried to hold back, the stronger the pull became. I started noticing little things like how he'd find reasons to be near me when his father wasn't looking, or how his voice would lower when he spoke only to me, like we were in on some secret no one else could touch. One evening, when the tension was almost unbearable, he whispered something I still can't forget. "What if he already knows?" The words sent a chill down my spine. It was a terrifying thought, but also one that made my pulse race. What if the thing we had been so careful about wasn't as hidden as we believed? From that moment, every sound in the house felt suspicious. Every shadow felt like it was watching us. The suspense turned into paranoia, and the paranoia only pushed us closer together. It was like being caught in a storm. You know you should find shelter, but instead, you stand in the rain, unable to move, waiting to see what the lightning will strike next. The breaking point came faster than I expected. One evening, the house felt strangely heavy, like it was holding its breath. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I realized both of them, my husband and his son, were sitting at the table, watching me in silence. It was unusual, unsettling. My husband cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on me, and then he asked a question that sent my heart racing. "Is there something you're not telling me?" The room froze. For a second, I thought my knees would give out. I glanced at his son, and his expression told me everything. He was just as stunned, just as caught off guard. That was the moment I knew my husband had sensed more than we realized. The conversations, the lingering glances, the silence we thought we had hidden, it had all left traces. I tried to laugh it off, to say he was just being paranoid. But the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe a word of it. The tension in the room was unbearable, and then, out of nowhere, his son spoke. His voice was steady, almost too steady, when he said, "Dad, you're imagining things. There's nothing to worry about." It was a bold move, one that made my chest tighten. In that instant, he wasn't just protecting me, he was protecting us both. But the story didn't end there. My husband eventually nodded, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. The rest of the night passed in strained silence, and when he finally left the room, I thought the storm had passed. But then the unexpected happened. As I turned to put the dishes away, I found myself face to face with his son. For the first time, there was no mirror, no silence, no distraction. Just us, standing there in the open, our secret balanced on a knife's edge. The climax wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, intense, and filled with the weight of everything we had carried until that point. In that silence, I realized something shocking. It wasn't just about forbidden emotions or stolen glances. It was about choices. And in that moment, the choice wasn't mine, it was his. He stepped back. His eyes softened, and he whispered, "We can't do this." The words hit harder than I expected. After all the tension, all the buildup, it wasn't a confession of love, it was a line finally drawn. And maybe that was the real twist, not that we gave in, but that he was the one strong enough to pull away. I walked away that night with my heart heavy, but also strangely relieved. The secret stayed buried, my marriage remained intact, and yet, the memory of what almost happened would never leave me. The days after that night felt different. The tension that had once filled every corner of the house slowly began to fade. It wasn't gone completely, how could it be, after everything we almost let happen? But it softened into something unspoken, a quiet understanding that things could not, and should not, go any further. His choice to step back had changed everything, and even though part of me felt the sting of loss, another part of me felt grateful. Sometimes strength isn't found in giving in to what you want, it's found in walking away before it's too late. My husband never brought up his suspicion again. Maybe he convinced himself it was nothing, or maybe he simply chose to ignore the signs because facing them would mean shattering the life we'd built. Either way, his questions stopped, and the house returned to its familiar rhythm. Outwardly, everything looked normal: family dinners, late nights, the usual routines. Inwardly, though, I carried the memory like a hidden scar. What surprised me most was how the distance that followed between me and his son actually brought a kind of peace. We still spoke, still shared laughs when the moment called for it, but there was a new boundary, a respect we hadn't managed before. It was as if both of us had finally acknowledged that whatever had been building between us wasn't worth the cost. And maybe that realization was the closure I didn't know I needed. Looking back, I can see the layers more clearly now. It wasn't just about attraction, it was about loneliness, about the need to feel seen and understood. His father's absence had created a space, and in that space, something unplanned grew. But not all feelings are meant to be followed. Sometimes they're meant to teach us, to remind us of the lines we should never cross, and to show us what we really value. The story ended not with fireworks, but with quiet choices. And those choices mattered. Because in the end, love and loyalty are measured not by what we feel in secret, but by what we choose to protect when temptation comes. So I leave it with you. Do you think the story ended the way it should have, or do you feel there's still another chapter waiting to be told? Comment below and let me know how you feel about the ending, and if you'd want to see a sequel exploring what could have happened if the line had been crossed. Summary: this is the story of a woman caught between loyalty and temptation after catching her stepson looking at her in the mirror. What begins as silent glances grows into dangerous tension, layered with loneliness, romance, and the pull of forbidden desire. Just when it seems they might give in, an unexpected twist changes everything, forcing choices that bring both pain and closure. It's a story about love, boundaries, and the fragile balance of relationships.